So for people who haven't been on, I think everyone probably knows, we have Karen Wright and Mike Arduser and myself talking today about Melissodes females. And Karen was sharing with us a spreadsheet that she's had forever, probably, that has characteristics of all the Melissodes North America, would we say? But I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Hi, everyone. So, yeah, since there was no key available on Discover Life, I made my own using Excel. The only problem with Excel is that you can't have pretty pictures on it the way you can with other things. But the filter function in Excel works just like the Discover Life key does. So you can filter out certain characters, you can and narrow down your list down to just what you need. So I have developed this for Melissodes. It has a lot of characters in it and it looks really complicated. If anybody wants to try using this, I'm in the process of cleaning it up and making some instructions of using this. But just for anybody who may not be interested in Melissodes, but really wants to develop their own local key to all the bees in their little area, this is a good way of taking a huge amount of information and customizing it to what you need. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see that now.
We got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, here's all the, can you see my cursor going up and down?
It would probably be better if you use the bottom right to make it a little bit bigger.
Okay, here.
Yeah.
All right. So if you see all of I have all the species listed here, as well as the, this is just all the subgenera. So Apo Melissodes, Calla Melissodes, Eclectica, U Melissodes, Helio Melissodes, Melissodes sensu strictus, Ilo, and Tacky. So you can narrow it down just to U Melissodes just by clicking on that. And now we only have the U Melissodes. But all of these are in my own little codes. So I'm working on making basically a key to my key. But you can also go over here on the far end and you can go to range and you can get rid of everything that's not in your area and say, just do things that are in, let's see, here's all of Canada, US and Mexico, central US, east of the Rockies in Canada. And so you can make your key down here just East Coast. And then that makes it even smaller, right? And then say your bee has a very heavily chagrined galea. We talked about that last time. It's where the galea look like sandpaper, really rough. And now we're down to just, let's see, East Coast with chagrin galea in the subgenus U Melissodes. Now we're already down to just a handful of species that we can then look at the other characters, and then you can narrow them down again. So we can say, oh, well, the wing length of these guys, this bee that I have here is only like 8. So we can get rid of these bigger bees here. And now we're down even further, and so on and so forth. So it works similar to a Discover Life key in that you can, and I always use this split screen here so that I can keep the species list and the top row, which is the names of the characters. And then you can just remove everything by unclicking filter. So anyway, it's a very customizable way of making your own key that doesn't depend on creating a dichotomous key. So right now I'm working on defining each of the column headings. So T1 hair color is the color of the light basal hairband on T1. T1 black patch, for many species, there's this on the lateral edges of the of T1 where you have your light hair, and then at the apical and you have dark hair. But on the either side, there's a lot of species have these black bristle-like hairs that go up into the basal T1 hairband, and that can be important in some species. So anyway, I'm in the process of defining these things and then giving descriptions of each of my shorthand things. So anybody can email me. Anybody can email me. I'll put my email in the chat.
Or do we want to have Claire send it out to everybody? Or would you?
Sure, I can just email it to Claire. I want to clean it up a little bit and make all those definitions.
Yeah, as soon as, like, whenever you send it to me, I will send it in. So you're not getting a whole bunch of emails from me. I'll just send it in one of the weekly update reminder emails.
Yeah.
Because everyone wants it, Karen.
That is 100% sure.
All right. You know, and it's even down to if you know it's between these two species, you just use the filter function just to list those two species. If you could scroll all the way across and see which characters separate, which are different between those two species, and you know what to look at.
Yeah, and I find so Discover Life is like that, but I have taken a couple Andrina groups and done exactly what Karen has done, because a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of really subtle characters and you need a weight of evidence. So I have, for example, done this for Eastern Trachandrina females and for Eastern Melandrina males, because if you look at again, we're back to Wally LaBerge, or even Discover Life, it's like the decisions are not very clear for separating out those groups. It's easier to have all the characters listed across and see how many of those you can find in that particular specimen, so you feel the most comfortable, because it's particularly this really falls apart in a dichotomous key, because you're forced into making it's either this or this, and a lot of times you're like, I'm not sure. And so I really like the Excel approach for these really tricky groups. So I think that we'll take Karen's stuff and expand it to all the Melissodes in north of Mexico, at least initially, and maybe south of Mexico after that. But I think the Excel spreadsheet will also be something to continue to maintain, because it often is easier when you're dealing with multiple subtle things and you can then see them all at once.
Right. And there are several species that maybe I didn't have a big enough series to look at. So maybe I haven't captured all the variability in there as well. So anybody who has either characters that I've missed, which I'm not sure about that because I pretty much went from mandibles to stinger. But if anybody has any that they would like to add to it or adapt. This also, a couple of times in there, like I'll have a separate line for what I call Pallidiosignatus light and Pallidiosignatus dark, because you do get some darker specimens where the hairband characters don't work very well at all because all the hair is dark. But you need to focus on the puncture characters.
Mm-hmm.
So
cool. And so thank you very much, Karen. I mean, this has really been one of the neat things, is talking to you and Mike and other people and finding out these other tactics and characters and resources for ID, because yeah, it's rough out there. So what would you guys want to start looking at? So I can pull specimens from my collection. Karen and I, we talked about hair bands, possible things, but Mike, do you have any thoughts too? And then we'll put specimens underneath the microscope.
Where did we leave off last week?
I think we covered all the smaller subgenera except for Melissodes.
Okay.
And if we're going to still continue to focus just on East Coast, there's not a whole lot of Melissodes that get very far east. So we're looking at, do you have tucker eye there? That's a really weird one that's kind of fun.
In the Midwest.
I was wondering if Sam had a specimen of it. I'm finding it
think
always
so,
as far
because-
south as Mississippi.
Sam, you
Yeah.
asked me to send you some a couple of years ago, and I did because you didn't have any, but you sent them back. So you probably don't have any.
Right. I should have. Why did I send them back?
Well, I don't know.
But anyway, I don't have any tucker eye.
Okay.
You have coloradensis? That big
I
dark
do.
one?
Yeah.
That's a cool one. Totally distinctive.
That's an interesting one too, because I've now seen that in Eastern Ohio and places that I wasn't expecting.
And this one has a few good characters in it. The F2 on this species is rather long, which isn't a character that's, there's only a few species that has a longer F2. So that makes it distinctive.
I'm going to share my screen now. Yeah, I don't think of females as having a whole lot of antennal characters. See, let me tilt this a little bit more.
And coloradensis is also a very big bee for Melissodes. So it sticks right out in that it's so big. But see how that F2 is longer than wide?
So here's pedestal F1 and then F2 here.
Yeah. And in
So-
most Melissodes, F2 is just as long as wide or shorter. And so there's just a handful of bees where F2 is noticeably longer than it is wide.
All right, that's, see that, I don't think that's in the Discover Life keys. I can't remember, but that's, I'm sure it's in your Excel spreadsheet, and I'm looking forward to adding more categories like that.
And the pygidial plate in that species is unusual too. It's pretty narrow compared to most other Melissodes. Very narrowly triangular, if you can see it.
Yeah, so if you guys want to talk about what are the uses of pygidial plates to these bees?
Well, they're obviously used in moving dirt around, and sometimes they're covered with dirt or in part, so you have to scrape it off. But that's the seemingly the primary use. When you watch them, when you watch them digging the nest, that's the back end that's pushing the dirt out, and so that must help in that effort.
Right. And also probably, go ahead.
One thing to note is that Melissodes, if you're working west of the Mississippi, you're going to run into a lot more species of Melissodes. And the females of that subgenus all have very narrow pygidial plates compared to the rest of Melissodes. There's also a handful within Melissodes that have very pointy triangular pygidial plates, rather than sort of what I call a broad U or a narrow U or triangular. And so the shape of the pygidial plate can be good. I tried to use texture of the pygidial plate, but it is so variable that it really doesn't work. Some species seem to have a real distinct ridge around the edge of the pygidial plate, but it doesn't seem to hold up as a good species character.
Yep. So here, here's a specimen. It's not a great specimen, but you can see some of the problems. Like here's F4, T4, where often these characters of the hair patterns along the rim are really useful. But look how like am I looking at white hairs, or I'm looking at dark hairs that are gummy and turning dark? Is that actually a bare patch there, or is that a worn out patch? And I'm not even sure for this particular species or specimen, but you can see some of the problems of specimens that are both old and are not processed really well.
So there's another, the picture that you have up right now is good because it shows the pitting really nicely. I think that's on T3 there. You can see
Yep.
that there's an apical band across the entire edge, regardless of whether or not it has hair, that is unpitted. And how wide that little strip is on both T1, T2, and T3 is quite important. And so some bees see how this is really narrow little strip, and then it goes right into some pretty big and deep punctures. Whereas other species will have much more sparse punctures and even lighter punctures, so that they're not so deep and they don't look like real punctures. They're just more dimples.
Right. And I think that's tricky sometimes when you're starting out, because you tend to dismiss them, but most of the time, I would say maybe all the time, there's a hair coming out of the pit. So often the hairs are pointing at the pit from which they come from. And in something like denticulatus, which we probably should show because of the unique hair on the scopal hair pattern, but it also has a really broad and unpitted rim on T2 and probably T3.
Yeah.
I've got a different specimen here of coloradensis that might be in better shape. Let me just swap it out here. And it's got a lot of pollen on it. So here, and Karen, you were talking about this T4 interruption. So
Yep.
This would fit your definition, right? You want to talk about that some?
Yeah, so in my Excel spreadsheet, what I have down for the T4 interruption is my code is BR less than 1/3, meaning that it's interrupted by a brown area less than 1/3 the width of the total segment. And so sometimes that black area on some species is wider than 1/3. And then sometimes there's a brown hair fringe all the way across the segment. And sometimes there's not a hair interruption, but there's a nude area. And this nude area can just be a tiny little brown notch that's hairless, or it can be a large black triangular area that doesn't have any hairs, but it's nude. So whether or not that interruption has hair, doesn't have hair, and or what color that hair is, and how big that interruption is. All those can be really, really important in Melissodes females.
So on this one, would you call this, so this, to me, it would be tricky, because is this a third? It's about a third in my book. So how would you, how would you call that? And it's got no brown hairs whatsoever, but is bare.
Right. So it's just a nude triangle less than 1/3 the width of the entire segment. And so that's how I would look at that. And it is just about a third. So if I was doing like the trying to narrow down my specimens, I wouldn't get rid of any that said equal to or less than 1/3. But and
Yeah,
another just up on that next segment, T3 and T2 there, with coloradensis, you have some interesting hairband patterns on the other segments. So T3 is what I would call interrupted, because that hairband is interrupted by much less than 1/3 the width of the segment. And then on T2, you do have those little white areas coming in from the side, I call that lateral. So they're, the separation between the two is much more than 1/3 the width of the segment. So I call that lateral, and then I'd call what is on T4 just interrupted.
And I think that's a unusual pattern in general, because normally T2 and 3 have complete hair bands.
There's a lot of species where T2 is even just narrowly interrupted, where there's just a skinny little line down the middle. And then there are quite a few species with the lateral, just two little white mini bands coming off from the sides.
The wing, Sam, you showed the wings for a second, but the wings are very, very dark in this species. In the Midwest, anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only a handful that are like that, and this one stands out because of it.
Right. Well, what I do with the wings is make sure that the paper or whatever is on your desk under your microscope is bright white. And then when you look through the wing, if the paper is the same color when you're not looking through the wing, then I call that clear. But this I would definitely call deeply impugment. So it's definitely darker than that bright white.
Yeah, that's a great trick, a great way of explaining it, because sometimes, you know, it's like this one is a good example. Like particularly if I'm showing it over a darker area, it's like, well, that's pretty clear, right?
You can see through it. Sure.
And then you can see through it. And so, but having a definition of no difference when going over the light area, I think is nice, because now it's pretty clear that it is darkened. And sometimes you're not sure, like, is that what they're thinking, dark or not dark? You know, that kind of thing. All right, anything else on coloradensis that we should look at character-wise?
It's just very heavily pitted for a Melissodes. The pitting is very, and it's huge.
Yeah, it is huge.
So, and then if you see a small one with pitting that heavily, it's likely to be Tuckeri, this bee that we've been talking about, that has extremely heavy pitting, but it's a normal size Melissodes.
Okay.
And Sam, do you have any of the other more typical Melissodes, lustrous or lupinus or any of those? They're mostly West Coast.
Yeah. I really don't have. I mean, that's our goal in the future is to come up with a nationwide collection, because we're getting more space. We now have just ordered a bunch of drawers and things, but for right now, we're still with a little synoptic collection from the East.
All right. Well, if anybody is listening out there who is interested in more Melissodes, most of them have almost no pitting on the scutum. They're very, very bare, and the distance between punctures can be greater than 5 puncture widths. I mean, really, really shiny, smooth, bare scutums or smooth scutums with no pitting. And that's a good way to narrow down to a lot of the northwestern Melissodes.
So I'm pulling up, to contrast, I'm pulling up denticulatus for 2 reasons. One is just to show, maybe that's not the best specimen, to show specimens that have, trying to get the bare area on the back.
Right.
Oh, here we go. So you can see this contrasting specimen with a very wide bare area, in contrast to what we were just looking at. So there's.
Yeah. So the hair bands are definitely not complete across the entire segment. And then you have that super wide apical area with no pitting on it, or very light few pittings.
And what species do we have there?
This is denticulatus.
Thanks.
And so that's a good character for separating out. And then let's see if I can get a shot of the infamous S-shaped. I find that if I don't have other specimens around, or I can't see because pollen is in the scopal hairs, that I have a hard time telling this from subillatus and illatus sometimes.
Right. So for me, when I look at the scopal hair, I think it's been fried by electrocution. If it looks like it's been fried by electrocution, then it's either veroniae or denticulatus. But if it just looks like it went to the hairdressers to get a perm, then it's not either of those two species. So the other species can be wavy, just, they come off the main rachis and they just kind of curve away, but they don't have this crazy look to them.
Yeah, all these different S curves and things like that going on.
So there are only two species with this character, with the crazy scopal hairs. And Sam or Mike, do you guys know if this is a pollen specialization feature, or I don't know why only these two species?
Yeah, they're both mostly, the primary host plants, veroniae, but there are other bees that collect pollen from veroniae that aren't specialists, but they have different scopal hairs. So that's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't thought about that. The ones with the modified side hairs are actually both these veroniae specialists. So you would kind of think that that's a possibility, that the reason they have these hairs and nobody else does, right? So you would think it's evolved for some special reason, like Enotherus specialists have very distinctly different scopal hairs.
I think it looks a lot like Diodasia's scopal hairs.
Oh.
Diodasia gets this really, like, I don't know, electrocuted, crazy looking scopal hairs, but they're mostly Malvaceae specialists. So
Yeah.
Or Asteraceae, but anyway, between these two species with the crazy scopal hairs, the way I tell them apart the easiest is that denticulatus has brown sternal hairs, whereas veroniae has very light colored sternal hairs, so on the underside of the abdomen. Yeah, so those dark brown sternal hairs is one good way to tell those two species apart. And on the outer edges, there are always some light hairs on the sternum. Even in almost completely black species, you'll still have these little white areas, but the center of the sterna are all dark brown.
I also find that it's useful when morpho sorting to flip the specimens over, because often there's a pattern between the species that may be difficult to describe but is useful.
Yeah. And then if you have both of them next to each other, veroniae is much bigger bee than denticulatus. And for wing length, for size of Melissodes, I always use wing length. And I measure that just like LaBerge did, from the very base of the tegula, including the tegula, all the way to the tip of the wing. And so wing length is a fairly reliable within Melissodes. Although I have come across several things that I would say, like I found a Melissodes tristis that is only 1/4 the size of a normal Melissodes. And it is most definitely Melissodes tristis. And I think it's just some genetic aberrant. So sometimes you can find really weird things going on, like gynandromorphs and stuff like that. But usually within Melissodes, wing length is pretty consistent within species.
And also you have fewer of the problems of like abdomens getting extended and retracted, abdomens bending,
Right.
the head tilting. It's difficult to really come up with a accurate total length value for a bee because of the way the specimen is often laid out.
Yeah, I even tried counting hamada, but it's not a good character on the species level. For one, almost all Melissodes have between 12 and 14. So it's just not that great, but wing length does work.
So why don't you tell people what hamada are, in case they don't know.
In Hymenoptera, hamada are the hooked hairs. I don't think they're really hairs, but they're the hooked things that come off of the base of the bottom of the, the bottom of the, off the top of the hind wing, which connects the wings in flight so that they act as single wing on either side. Not sure if I explained that very well.
Nope, that's good. Do you guys want have anything in particular you want to look at next?
Do you have a veroniae?
I don't.
Wow.
Does that occur out there, Sam? Do you ever see it?
No, I don't think.
I think veroniae is in the sort of Texas, Oklahoma area, isn't it?
It's common in Missouri and in Illinois.
Yeah, so Midwest more than East Coast.
Yeah, there's a lot of distributional things that basically are in that axis along the Mississippi River to the west that are some kind of prairie plains things. And then some of them then, I think if people started looking more closely, they'd see that they actually show up in these pockets of prairie remnants and in odd places. So for example, in Maryland, which you don't think of as prairie at all, they have a whole series of basically Midwestern prairie species that show up in very small numbers in these very dry relictual areas, and sometimes very old, long ago collected specimens when the landscape was much more open. So I think that everyone should be aware that these specimens can jump quite long distances or are hiding in locations that you don't think of. Like I can think of many multiple state distributional disjunctions.
Sam, what do we have on deck?
I just threw this up just in case no one had anything else in particular. This is coreopsis. So if we want to talk through a couple of just some specimens about what we're looking at and why we're thinking about this one or not. I mean, I can pull anything you want, but
yeah. So coreopsis definitely has black hair growing out of the punctures on the apical end of T2. So that area that's apical of the pale hairband is almost completely covered in black hairs. And you do have to look sideways to see that character, because otherwise the black color of the integument itself, you can't really see the hairs very well. But instead of it being either nude or light colored hairs, coreopsis definitely has dark hairs going all the way down to the edge of T2.
And this is why these classes are really useful, so that, you know, we can both talk about these things and then look, and I'm going to try and get a better shot of this and demonstrate the subtleties.
Coreopsis also has really dark hair on the inside of the hind basitarsus. A lot of Melissodes have more of an orangish brown color of hair, and coreopsis tends to have darker hair on the hind basitarsus.
So you can see how actually difficult it is to see the hair here. But if we're at my highest magnification,
Yeah, but
and
you can see that it goes all the way across the segment there. There's no
Yeah.
bald spot in the middle of the segment. So those black hairs go all the way across.
and it both looks like there are sometimes no hairs, and then it's hard to tell what the color of the hair is unless you go to the side, which is why we always advocate for people using their fingers so that they can rock the specimen back and forth to find and track down these, particularly things like, well, is that black hair or is that bad processing? What am I looking at here?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to spend a little bit of time. I don't know if I can show really well. You can see a little bit of the black hair here where it's contrasting with the sides, but it's hard to see sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You can see some of the black
but in
hairs.
coreopsis, both T2 and T3 will have that black hair
Oh,
below
yeah, there you
the hairband. Also, these guys should have black hair on the vertex. And if you get a good headshot there, one other character for coreopsis is that F2 is almost half orange on one side of it. That might be difficult to see in the lighting, but you can definitely see the black hairs on the vertex.
All right, let's maybe
Sam,
turn.
before you go,
Are you
bump
talking
the
on the
cursor. No, take it back. Just bump the cursor out of the way for the picture.
Okay. Let me do this right now. So are you talking about the underside being orange?
Yeah, so that's that looks way darker than most that I know.
Okay.
So maybe it's just hard to see on the camera, but there's usually, you know, the underside of the antennae are quite light colored, orangish.
It's also possibly the bad shot there.
Yeah.
And these are from South Dakota. So maybe they're a little more sunburned, or it's, you know, it may be just that the lighting isn't sufficient to see that color there. Yeah, hard to see.
Hard to see, but if you put your cursor on F2 there.
Okay, let me get. You want the underside of F2?
Yeah.
F2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was easier to see from the angle before because it's hard to see that light color. Anyway, the most common species to confuse this one with is with Montanus, but that won't show up until almost to the Rockies, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never run into that one.
But
I think it's down.
Niveus is common in the Midwest, and that gets confused with coreopsis a lot.
Huh.
They both have super shiny galea,
Right.
But Niveus has, instead of the dark hairs that you were showing on T2 and T3, has all light colored hairs. They get confused a lot, at least in stuff that gets sent to me.
Right.
Oh, there's the
I don't
orange.
see Niveus often. Yeah, there's the orange. If you could just angle it a little bit to see F2 there. F1 is always dark in Melissodes females. But where that orange starts, whether it starts on F2 or if it waits until F3 before it starts turning light. And then there are only like maybe 5 species of all Melissodes that have no orange and just have really dark black antennae. And I don't know what Nibia's antennae look like, so I'm not very familiar with that species. I don't get it often.
I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
gonna be able to show this super well.
No, it's hard to see in the lighting there, but if you had it under your own microscope, you could see where it turns orange halfway through F2. If you are out by Colorado or that area and you get Montanus, Montanus doesn't turn orange until F3. So do you have any of, or would you like to discuss any of the following? This is the group of bees that have a black fringe all the way across the bottom of T4. And it includes wheeleri, tinctus, manipularis, pileatus, and boltonae. They're all really hard to tell apart, I think.
Yeah, that is a tough group. I recently gave away a lot of Melissodes to get them DNA checked, so I'm light on those, but let me see what I can find here.
Can you repeat your list?
Wheeleri, tinctus, manipularis, pileatus, and boltonae.
Okay, I've got a tinctus here. At least, let's say, I think it's a tinctus. This one's from Florida.
Okay. And Florida is I think manipularis only occurs in Florida. Is that true?
I can't recall.
I think you're right. Yep.
All right, but manipularis is huge. It's much bigger than tinctus.
Yeah, tinctus is small. Let me see if I have manipularis. I don't in the females.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have tinctus here. So what do you look at for this one?
Well, in my book, tinctus should have a black fringe all the way across the bottom of T4, and you've got very white hairs all the way across.
Yeah, and so I'm going to say also that I've always struggled with that one. So I could be totally wrong on this specimen, and I would like to know that.
Right. Well,
So,
boltonae is a good alternative that it might be. Tends to be much lighter colored, but other than that, have very similar hair patterns. I don't know if anybody else has any other good characters for this group. Pileatus has the punctures on the scutum really far apart, so you can weed that one out. But these are really hard to tell apart, I think, and unless you have character or specimens to directly compare them to, they're really difficult. So see how far apart those punctures are? You might have, I'd have to compare them directly, but
yeah.
those are pretty wide apart.
So
another
it's possibly
species,
that it's
another species in that mix, at least over here in the Midwest, is Fumosus.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know that one very well at all.
That looks a lot like Boltonae. I mean, if you don't have both of them, it's hard to tell them apart.
Yeah. You have this one down as being wheeleri?
I had this as tinctus.
Oh, tinctus. Okay. Yeah. So in my notes,
Actually, I had it as near tinctus.
Okay. So in my notes, I have that for tinctus, that the punctures on the sputum are normal, meaning that they're anywhere between 1/2 and 1 puncture width across.
Got the ball of the tin in the way now. Just back.
Dan, I'm gonna offer you a 10-minute warning for your when you gotta jump.
Oh, okay. Thank you. A little bit hard to see. You can see there's a lot of hair there, but there's the pitting. So what would you call that pitting?
I'd be looking at the basomedial area. That looks like it's right by the tegula. But I'd be looking at the middle bottom area of the sputum. LaBerge referred to this as the basomedial area of the sputum. Yeah, right there. And those punctures are pretty far apart.
So you think it could be pileatus?
So I was thinking that, let's see. Yeah, pileatus, it might be, maybe.
Okay. Right. Well, I was on a maybe on this one too.
Yeah. I'd have to look at a bunch of other things as well. But when you get to this group, another big thing is the hair. How far up does the black hair on the sputum go? Does it go well above the line across the tegula? Does it really get up even to the pronotal lobes? Or is that black hair almost all just down at the base of the sputum?
Yeah, and this one goes up quite a bit above the tegula. You can see here's the tegula here, and here's the black hairs, and there's just a little bit of white hair before you get to the head up there.
Mm-hmm. And only a few of these species have black hair on the pronotal lobes. And that can be tricky because I've seen some things that I swear would be wheeleri, but they really only have maybe one black hair or none. So that I'm not sure if you can really trust that character. But if it's got a lot of black hairs on the pronotal lobe, then you know you're narrowing that group down.
So here's pretty sure the pronotal lobe, and it looks there's a lot of goopy things, but that looks all white.
All white,
We'll
yeah.
Up to the other side there. So yeah, this all looks all white too again. All right, so it sounds like need to rethink this as near tinctus and more like near pileatus.
Maybe. Again, I would check a bunch of the other characters as well, but this whole group gets kind of confusing.
Can you look at T1, Sam? Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, lots of hair.
This area is all white hairs.
Yeah, I was looking for punctures, but it's hard to see.
Let's we can zoom in a little bit more. There's a bunch of. Did you want the center, lateral, or what?
No,
what
yeah, I think that's enough. I was wondering. I mean, in the Midwestern populations of both Tony, don't look like that. I just wondered if that's what it might have been, but I don't think, at least in Midwestern terms, and I know that's a Florida specimen, that doesn't look like what I've been calling Boltonii. So those punctures are pretty close.
On T1, but not on the scutum. All right.
5-minute warning, Sam.
Got it. What else do we want to look at here in our last 5 minutes?
Subilatus and elatus.
Yeah, that's a group that I struggle with a lot. So I'm pulling out something that I've got down as subilatus. So you guys want to talk about where you see them and any general characters? I'm often looking at T4, but I'm not sure that's the best. How are you guys separating them?
So these two and wheeleri, I believe, they all have the T2 hairband is really high, separated away from the edge of the tergum, and it's a narrow band, and it's really high arched up away from the edge. And then underneath that hairband, you have almost no punctures, really smooth and shiny, almost reflective area with very, very few punctures. And so if you had that super high arched band, a lot of times it's interrupted. This one looks like it's tucked underneath the next terga, or hard to see there.
Yeah.
But
that's
anyway,
T3 we're mostly seeing.
Yeah, okay, so but T2, the area underneath the band, and the band is interrupted in the middle, but underneath where the band would be if it connected is really smooth and shiny.
Here's a different specimen.
Yeah, that's good.
You can see this is cleaner, but you can see the band is running up and kissing up to T1 there, and this is almost all just blank.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
And then the interband zone as well, which would be the area above the hairband, is also really sparse in punctures.
You can kind of see that. So how is that contrasting with elatus, or is it not at this point?
It's not. Those are both of them.
Yeah, I don't remember.
The way Laberge has them apart in the key is again back down at that interruption of T4, and they both have a small interruption of T4, and it looks like your specimen there might be very worn.
Yeah.
So a lot of the hairs are missing from there.
Yeah, this is the T4 area, and it's like there are no hairs left.
So all the hairs on that specimen have been rubbed off. But the way Laberge distinguishes between elatus and subilatus is that if there are punctures right in the center, then it's elatus. And if it's not punctured, if there's a little smooth area right in the middle of the T4 segment, then it's subilatus. And usually if there is a hairband, you have to scrape the hairs off to see whether or not there's any punctures right in the center there anyway.
Yeah. Now, another frustrating group. So here's T4. This is T4. Here's the remnants of that hairband. And this is sort of this big bare area, which they often have.
Mm-hmm. Which I'd say is pretty not punctured.
Yeah.
So according to Laberge's key, that would be subilatus.
Yeah. And my impression is that subilatus often has this bigger bare area. Ugh, can't even hardly see it. Than elatus anyway. I see more subilatus than I see elatus.
Well, yeah, geography can help a little bit. I mean, elatus is really northern. I mean, Upper Peninsula, northern Minnesota, and
Illinois.
Yeah, I've never seen subalautus from up in the boreal regions.
Okay.
But alatus, and it's small, tends to be a little smaller,
Okay.
just a little.
Yeah. I'm going to jump, but you guys continue, and Claire and Karen and Mike, you can do a wrap, but I got to go to yet another Zoom call. So I'll say bye, but
Right.
I'm
See you,
going to
Sam.
stop presenting, and we'll return.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So good. All right. Well, I got to go. Bye.
Okay, see ya.
Sorry.
Bye, Sam. So we can keep talking. There were no questions in the chat this whole time. So while we won't have the microscope up anymore, we have two very knowledgeable people on for your questions.
Does anybody have any particular species they're interested in?
And you can unmute. I mean, I am still watching the chat, but you know, we're here. We have one in the chat though, and I'll let you unmute to elaborate. Since Melissodes' wing length is consistent, can it be specified?
So in my spreadsheet, if you ever want to attempt to use it, use at your own risk, I might say. Yeah, I have basically a range of millimeters of wing length for each species. And it rarely ranges more than 1 millimeter within a species. So you can use it, at least for the really big bees and the really small bees, you can use it to cut down your options by about half. So yeah, I always just keep a clear ruler with millimeters markings right next to my scope. I zoom way out so that you can get the entire wing in the image. And I just hold the ruler right next to the wing, and I make sure that I measure all the way to the base of the tegula and then all the way to the tip of the wing. And the only time it doesn't work is when the bee is really old and has shredded wings and you can't tell how long the wing really is.
They say thank you.
Oh, black hair on the tegula. Let's talk about that. It's most important in the Melissodes sensu strictu group, but it can also be important in a lot of the Melissodes as well. So hair on the tegula, in most species, it's light colored. In some species, it's light at the narrow part of the tegula where it attaches to the body, and then it only turns dark on the sort of bulge of the teardrop shape at the bottom. But there are a few species where that black hair extends all the way to the base of the tegula, to the pointy bit at the top. And so that those dark hairs on the tegula can be really good at distinguishing different species, especially if you have one that has only like yellow hair on the tegula, then there's only a few species that have that option. If you have one that has black hair all the way up to the basal end of the tegula, that's important. But the most common state is light at the tip, at the top of the teardrop, and dark at the base of the teardrop. But that can be a really good character to look at.
Cool. Just taking notes on that. And you said that for sensu strictu group and
some of the Melissodes, Melissodes.
okay, that's what I thought you said.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times that character just goes with, is it really a black bee or is it really a light colored bee? But when it gets important is when there's a contrast. When you have like a black bee with yellow hairs on the tegula, that's important.
Karen, I just wanted to ask you, do you think there are a number of undescribed Melissodes out there?
I think I'm keeping track of at least 7, most of which are West Coast, Northwest in particular, Oregon, Washington area, or Northern California. The Melissodes group has the most undescribed species, and they're really hard to tell apart. Terry Griswold has one that he has separated out that still hasn't been described for a while, very similar to lupinus. That whole group gets kind of tricky up in the Northwest. And then I think I have at least 2 other species in that group. In Oregon, in one valley in Oregon, there's a Heliomelissodes that has, it's either a population that has a disease. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this before, but the punctures all throughout the body are very, very sparse and irregular and deep.
Wow.
And it, other than that, it's a perfect Heliomelissodes. But these punctures are really bizarre. And I have like 200 specimens that all came from this one valley that have either this weird deformity or is its own species. Within Melissodes, that's a really tough one. I think there, instead of being more undescribed species, I think there might be a bunch of species that aren't really good species. And these are the ones that all have, in LaBerge's key, it's couplet 55. And it's where on T3, the basal hairband, or the apical hairband, goes all the way to the edge of the segment on T3. And so they're small, all light-haired, very hairy, you know, almost entire covered with light hairs. Their gallias can range from super shiny to super shagreen. And there's about 12 bees in this complex. And I bet you there's really only about 6 or 7 good species in there. So I find them impossible to discern, and the variation throughout them all just bleeds into one another. So I don't know where to draw those lines. That'd have to be a genetics level study for sure. There's one new species of Tachymelissodes out of Montana that Mike Ivey has. So yeah, there's a lot of undescribed. My guess is that Mexico is filled with undescribed species. I don't even try to identify any Melissodes except if they're in the Chihuahuan Desert proper. If they're in southern Mexico or in the more coastal areas, I bet there's so many undescribed down there that we don't know about. So any other species or characters anybody wants to hear about?
Yeah, anybody speak up. I think we might have asked this last week, but how did you become so familiar and start grouping them down into your, like, the subgenera, since we don't have a whole lot of subgenera guides?
Right. Well, subgenus is really hard, and the same way you identify bees straight to genus and you skip the families, I usually skip the subgenera as well. The male characters, when you're working on the males, that's where the subgenera gets really cool. Like Calamelissodes, the males have this clear flap on S4. And so and then for most of the non-Melissodes, the labrum is entirely yellow. So there's a lot of really good subgeneric characters for the males, not so much for the females. That narrow pygidial plate for the female Calamelissodes is really good. Really bright orange inside of the hind basitibial, on the inside, that hair is really, really brightly orange. It's almost always Melissodes sensu stricto, but really not good subgeneric characters, which is why I made my spreadsheet contain everything. So you don't have to know the subgenus before you get down to the other things. But yeah, they're not nice for the females.
We've heard it for the other ones as well.
Yeah.
Just be nice to be able to, like, chunk them down in more bits, you know, as we learn different series.
Yeah, well, that's what's nice about using the filter function in Excel or Discover Life. You only look at the characters that are so obvious to you and you know I haven't been compromised. The hairband is all there. You can see it really nicely. And then you use that character. And if you have a worn specimen, you skip that one and you use what you can see. If you can't see the tongue, you don't use that character. If you can see it and it's obviously, Laberge used the term chagrined. I'm not sure how that differs from tessellate. I kind of think of them in the same way. It's a very roughened surface. Anyway, that's what's nice about these interactive keys is that you don't have to know the big picture stuff. If you can see some really cool details, you're going to get where you need to go. So having said all this, Melissodes is still a bear. If you're not working with a good reference collection, that needs to be a priority. So you need to find somebody who's already looked at Melissodes in your area. So either visit your local collection or talk to somebody. You can go through Discover Life and look at all the distribution for all the species and narrow it down to what might occur in your state. That could be a little bit risky, but mostly safe. So narrowing things down is your best bet. And if all else fails, you can send them to me. I still do a lot of IDs for Melissodes because some people just, like Terry Griswold hates them, Jack Neff hates them. I hate them too, but I'll still give them my best bet.
It's good that we have like one person. That's how the industry's growing.
Yeah, well, just don't be mad at me if in 20 years they do all the, genetics works on these things and I've got like 3 of them or 4 or more out of place. I
don't think anyone can be mad at you for being the only one to give it a go.
Yeah, well, when I told Terry Griswold I was going to do Melissodes for my PhD work, he told me I was crazy. And I just thought, if you work hard, if you really try hard, I can figure it out if I really put myself to it. And then a couple of years later, I was like, oh, why didn't I listen? Why didn't I listen? So it is a rough group.
You're funny. Well, we want to wrap it up then?
Yeah, I got to go too.
All right. Anybody feel free to contact me on Melissodes, or if you're more Western and more local on other groups.
Yeah. And as soon as whenever you wrap up the key to the key, just shoot it over and I will make sure that our 400 people get it. And then you'll probably get some comments.
Great. And Claire, do you know, am I added to that group?
I think I put you on the email list, but if I didn't, then you will be.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Have a good week, everyone.
All right. Take care, everybody.